businesses, organisations are allowing bring your own device, which is a big issue. I mean, how can organisations make sure their business information is kept safe, even with all this new devices bought by their employees?
Yeah, I think there are a few sort of answers to that. I don't think, like anything, and we say this all the time in security, there isn't a silver bullet. There isn't one thing that you're going to do that's going to suddenly make everything, super safe, and you can sit back and go, okay, I don't have to worry now. But I think mobile is an interesting one. Our research team, obviously they see lots of mobile malware, like many of the other security companies' research teams do. But one thing that strikes me at the moment, we'll say the hackers, they go where the money is, and the easy money at the moment actually is making money out of things like sending text to premium rate numbers or calling premium rate numbers without the owner of the phone knowing. If they can compromise a phone and get it to do that, they can make a lot of money doing that, and probably a biggest proportion of mobile malware that we see does that at the moment. But I think that's a starting point, and that's probably where the general hacking community was maybe 5 years ago, when they used to compromise individuals' computers, my laptop, your home PC, looking for our credit card numbers, because they could make a lot of money selling individual credit card numbers and banking details on the darknet. Today, the value of individual numbers has decreased, which is why you see things like the Target attack, where they steal 70 million of them in one go, because that's the only way now they can get a good return on their investment using that methodology. For mobile, they're making good money out of doing these premium rate SMS calls, but that will change. When you come back to vulnerabilities, the other thing we look at, obviously as part of our analysis, is how vulnerable the operating systems are. There's lots of talk about Android versus iOS or Windows Mobile, which ones are vulnerable, which ones aren't vulnerable. I guess there's a perception that iOS is quite safe compared to Android at the moment. Now, if you look at it from the sort of position of how much malware is out there, I think we see the vast majority of it is going after Android at the moment. But that's because that's where the market share is shifting, and Android is a bit more open, which makes it a bit easier for them to get permissions from a malicious app that gets permissions to be able to send texts, for example. So there's some benefits from that open system. But if you look at it more broadly, if you look at vulnerabilities, there's still tons of vulnerabilities get reported for iOS. So if you compare it at the vulnerability level, it starts to look not quite so black and white. So my point about there's going to be some tipping point when the cyber criminals stop focusing on sending premium rate texts, and they start using the mobile devices as the next attack vector to get into a large organisation. There's plenty of vulnerabilities that they can exploit, and those are exactly the same sorts of vulnerabilities that they exploit through us using our laptops and making a connection to a website where they've either compromised it or they've created a rogue copy of the website and are then able to deliver malware. If they can do that on our laptops with our fixed operating systems, they're going to be able to for sure do it on our mobile devices. And so, if you look at some of the vulnerabilities that come out, a lot of them are around browsers. That's a lot of the way that laptops and desktop devices get attacked. Well, it's a version of the same browser that runs in an iOS device or on an Android device. It's still underlying, actually in both of those, ironically, it's WebKit, isn't it? Which is, that's a kind of, that comes from the open source world. I was looking at this only earlier this week actually, and see a whole bunch of the vulnerabilities that Apple fixed not too long ago were actually reported to them by the Google WebKit team. So there's lots of commonalities there, but also it just shows that we can't be complacent. So we think that this is where we are at the moment. Everything's fine. Well, it's just going to be, if we get complacent about that and don't start considering that mobiles are the next attack vector, then we're going to be quite shocked quite soon. And the other thing that we looked at was the other thing that comes up quite a lot is insecure Wi-Fi connections, obviously mobile users, and we did a study earlier this year around the use of mobile devices. You said BYOD, so all the benefits that we all get from using our own device between work and home, so that we don't have to carry two devices around. Some people like to carry, maybe it feels more important carrying lots of devices around. Myself, one is enough for me to carry around. So being able to get my work email on there and access to any other documents that enable me to be able to respond to emails or do something that I need to do when I'm mobile. That's good news for me. But this study we did, we looked at, we focused around unsecured Wi-Fi. So there was, a few years back, there was a proof of concept around being able to effectively piggyback on someone's Wi-Fi connection. It's called Firesheep. I don't know if you remember the story around it. And I think there's actually a plugin for the Firefox browser that allows you to effectively exploit this now. But what it means is if someone is using their mobile device, and we kind of did this around people going on holiday, and that's a common thing. You think you're safe, you're just between your home and you're at work. But then you go away for holiday for 2 weeks and you want to stay in touch with the office, so you take your device with you. And you're connecting from anywhere. You're connecting from your hotel, your beachside hotel network, which you can be pretty sure hasn't got a secured Wi-Fi link, it hasn't got hardly any security on it at all.
No, of course.
And the attackers are always looking for something, something that's just easy for them to
choosing their moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the study we did, I think we found that even though lots of organisations these days are enabling their employees to use bring your own device, are putting things like mobile device management in place, which is a brilliant first step. That makes a big difference. A lot of the malware that I was talking about earlier, the kind of apps that are making use of things like these high premium rate text numbers, a lot of those come in through unofficial app stores. The sort of the iOS versus the App Store versus Google Play. There's lots of sort of contention about how well either of those is policed. Maybe Apple police is a bit better than Google, but what we actually found is a vast majority of the infected apps, it's not exclusively, but a vast majority come from people downloading them from unofficial app stores because they think they're getting a free version of Flappy Birds or whatever that they don't have to pay, or they can get to the the nth level without having to go through all the first levels. All those reasons that people go to those kind of unofficial app stores, that's where they're picking up a lot of these malicious apps. It's a re-engineered version of the original app, so that it's been broken, so the protection's been taken off it. But there's also been this nice little bit of extra code squeezed in the end, which is now making a whole bunch of money unbeknown to the user for the person who supplied the app. So mobile device management, obviously that can do things like stopping you devices connecting or having access to email or other resources if they're jailbroken, for example. And jailbroken is pretty much, that's the way you can get access to unofficial app stores. So things like that make a big difference. But you still can't stop. With those necessarily, you can't force your roaming users to only connect through a secured Wi-Fi link.
So where are we now with security with the cloud? Because obviously a lot of businesses have moved from having their own server farms, if you like, to offloading all that data management onto the cloud. I mean, but in its infancy, the cloud was kind of criticised for not being very secure. Yeah. Where are we now, do you think, with that?
So the challenge with cloud is it's a whole environment that's not in your control. I mean, that's the whole point of it in the first place. In most cases, the economies of it are because it's not in your control. I think the cloud providers are getting better at adding their own first levels of security. I mean, I guess there's two challenges for security at cloud providers. I think the insider threat is potentially larger from a cloud provider perspective, because they often host so many different data for so many different organisations. So that's one element, but that's a different kind of subject really. That's very hard to deal with. But from you as an organisation feeling confident that your data and the conversations, the traffic that you have going in between yourself and the cloud are secure. Firstly, the service providers are better at understanding putting their own security in place. I think the biggest sort of technology advancement, the biggest piece of technology you can use is encryption. I think that's the biggest thing to safeguard things, because whatever, if the data is encrypted, as long as you manage the keys yourself, because there's all sorts of issues around key management, then you can be pretty sure that you're in a good state. Otherwise, you have to start doing things like deploying virtual versions of your security appliances into those clouds, which is possible. And most of our security technology comes in virtual versions. So our files, our IPSs, our advanced malware detection products, our web and email products all have either versions that are virtualized that you can deploy in the cloud, or cloud versions that you can effectively route your traffic via, so that they can do scrubbing of that traffic. It's improving, but it's still always going to be that challenge when you don't manage it yourself.
So you're saying it's not something that you spend much time thinking about. I mean, what do you think at the moment should be keeping your average chief security officer up at night? I mean, what do you think people should be worrying about at the moment?
Well, we take this threat-centric approach, which is effectively thinking back to what I was saying around how sophisticated the attackers are getting. It's trying to look for the telltale signs that attackers are giving off when their attacks unfold. And you can do that just as well by looking into what's going in your cloud as you can on your physical infrastructure. It's all about seeing connections that go out to places that you weren't expecting. Some of that works with things like reputation. So if you know there's a particular set of addresses or URLs that relate to command and control traffic, for example, for botnets, that's easy to spot. But actually, the attackers they've got to the point where they can innovate and change the connection points that they have at such a rate that a lot of times, if it's a targeted attack, those sites don't even appear on a reputation list yet. So you can't just rely on reputation. So you have to use things like sort of heuristics and looking for patterns. So you go, okay, this new file that I've seen, I haven't seen it's bad, but back on this model of saying I'm going to be suspicious about anything new that I've seen, I've now seen it make a connection to an external URL, an external IP address, and I don't necessarily know that's bad at the moment, but actually a file that makes a connection out, that doesn't always happen. So that's the first indicator that something suspicious might be going on. So then you look at what else that file does in its time, and whether it whether it saves itself down the disk, whether it makes copies of itself, whether it starts communicating with other devices within the network. And you put those together, and we call those indicators of compromise. So this is a way of being more focused on the threat rather than thinking that we can stop everything coming in the first place. It's looking at the different signals that are given off by everything you've kind of half trusted to come into your network, and seeing whether it starts to behave in a way that you think it shouldn't be behaving. And what we can find is by continually monitoring the behaviour of files like this as they get to an endpoint, start to execute, do what they were going to do. Except if it is a piece of malware, the attacker had an objective. They wanted to get inside your environment. So to do that, they've got to get a file that is ultimately something they can execute on an endpoint, get that running, establish a connection to it somehow, and start to then drive the attack. And a lot of the ways that the attackers are doing that is innovative as well, because obviously they realise as defenders we're putting a lot of effort into trying to stop them doing exactly that. So they'll use things like social media to drive their attacks. So they make connections. Well, they'll send like tweets out, and the tweet will be a communication back to a command and control address. Effectively a command and control Twitter account. And then they use levels of indirection, and that will do something else. Or they use Facebook pages. We've seen cases of them using Facebook pages where they embed command and control messages into pictures. So the picture that's the profile on their command and control Facebook page they've created, with a perfectly nice looking picture, maybe it's of someone with their family or whatever, and they embed some extra data in that. And the malware they've written goes to that Facebook page. Now, if you're trying to protect your environment, endpoints going to Facebook pages doesn't look that suspicious. So you can see that you start to have to get a lot more sophisticated in the way you're trying to stop these attacks. So a file you haven't seen before that suddenly makes connections to Facebook or sends out tweets, okay, I'm going to start to keep an eye on that and see what else it does, because I'm not expecting something other than a Facebook application to be making connections to Facebook, or someone through the browser making a connection to Facebook. So putting all these things together, and we're constantly evolving more and more of these indicators, enables us to start to get a bit closer to the rate at which these attackers are innovating. What it means, if you can do that quickly enough, you can keep yourself out of the headlines. That's ultimately the problem. It's going from a detect and block to and keep things out, to a detect quickly that you've been compromised and bring the situation back under control. And one way we've sort of been talking about it is turning it from incident response to incident management. Response sort of says, I've got to run around like a headless chicken because I've just found out I've lost millions of credit card records. What am I going to do about it? I've got to find out how it got in. I've got to find out whether it's still going on. I've got to try and stop it. I've got to get to the bottom of the problem. If you're constantly monitoring what everything's doing in your environment, as soon as you know something looks like it's caused a problem, because you've been tracking it, you actually know where it went in your network. So you instantly know how bad your problem is. You instantly know how much data was sent out. You've got a great starting point, and actually you've got a way to probably contain it as well, because as soon as you see a file behaving badly, you can see whether it went to other places in the network. You know exactly where it is. You can immediately bring it under control. You don't have to go and re-image hundreds of endpoints, for example. You just go, actually it's this file, or this file that also downloaded this file and this other file, but this little community of files that are in my environment, that's what's driving the attack. If I can lock those down, which I can do very quickly if I've got that kind of presence in the network and on the endpoints, I can bring the whole situation back under control very quickly. That's not to say you didn't necessarily lose any credit card records, but you might only lose a few. You can make it a lot more manageable, or actually there's a good chance you did actually stop it before any data was exfiltrated. If you've done a good job of segmenting your network and protecting your databases, I said those things make it harder for the attackers, so they can get in, but it still extends the period before they can get to the data and get it out. So if you can see them moving around in your environment, giving off these telltale signs, you've put yourself in a really good position.